This murder case remained unsolved for exactly 7 years. Because of that, it would be easy to blame the investigator. However, once we learn what actually happened and how the crime was committed, we will understand whether that criticism was truly justified. Let's begin. On January 12, 1992, at around 2 p.m., on the 8th kilometer of the Tovuz-Boyuk Kushlak road, the body of an unidentified man was discovered. The victim had been killed with extreme brutality. Half of his body was stretched over the hood of a car. There were numerous stabbing and cutting wounds on his head. That same day, the Tovuz District Prosecutor's Office opened a criminal case under Article 95 of the Criminal Code that was in force at the time. The investigation was assigned to prosecutor's investigator Rauf Eliyev. At the scene, in a ditch near the road, investigators found a Vaz 21011 Zhiguli car with license plate number 2711. Not far from the body, lying in a pool of blood, investigators discovered what appeared to be the murder weapon: a large, blood-stained stone with worn edges and a 40-centimeter metal rod wrapped in paper. There were also clearly visible fingerprints on dried bloodstains on the car's windshield. At the same time, investigators noticed that the rear window of the car had been stolen by the criminals. At first glance, the crime scene contained plenty of evidence. All that remained was to identify the killer. The victim's gold ring had been taken from his finger, and the car had been looted. The initial theory was that the unknown man had been killed for robbery. Soon, investigators identified the victim as Kamal Hüseynov, a resident of the settlement of Kovlar. On March 5th, the forensic medical examination concluded that the cause of death was severe blunt trauma to the head, which caused bleeding in the brain and brain ventricles. The brutal murder shocked the entire community in Kovlar. At Kamal Hüseynov's funeral, grieving relatives tearfully begged the police and prosecutors to find the killers as soon as possible. Investigators asked the victims' relatives the usual question: who do you suspect? At that point, however, there were no clear leads. The question was also asked to Kamal's wife, Sevda Huseynova, but she was still in shock from the tragedy and could not concentrate enough to give investigators any useful information. She only said that on the night her husband was killed, 2 unknown men came to their yard and asked for Kamal. Because it was completely dark, she did not go outside. She answered them from the doorway. However, she mentioned something important. She said that one of the men's voices sounded familiar, but she couldn't remember whose voice it was. 10 days later, Sevda Huseynova returned to the prosecutor's office and gave another statement. She still couldn't identify the voice, but she insisted it had sounded familiar. Investigators questioned everyone who seemed suspicious, but all investigative actions and operational searches produced no results. It was as if the killers had disappeared into thin air. After 5 months of exhausting work, investigator Rauf Eliyev concluded that the district prosecutor's office could not solve the case. On June 12, 1992, he signed a decision to suspend the investigation. The case remained frozen for 7 long years. During that time, many rumors spread among the locals. Some people believed the murder had been ordered by someone influential and that the case was intentionally being ignored. But the investigators had no solid evidence to support those rumors. For 6 years and 8 months, the killers remained free. Then, on August 24, 1998, Kamal Hüseynov's widow, Sevda Huseynova, submitted a written statement to the Tovuz prosecutor's office. In it, she wrote that she had finally begun to suspect someone in her husband's murder. The next day, she met with the district prosecutor. She explained that after her husband's death, a young man named Elvin Kuliyev, who was a friend of her neighbor, had started visiting their house frequently. Every time the conversation turned to Kamal's murder, Elvin would become extremely nervous. His body would tremble, and he would look frightened. After a few such conversations, he suddenly stopped visiting their home. Recently, Sevda had also learned that Elvin associated with criminal individuals. Then she remembered the voice she had heard that night. She slowly became convinced that the familiar voice belonged to Elvin. Because of this new information, the prosecutor ordered the reopening of the case. The renewed investigation was assigned to senior investigator Murad Mammadov. He carefully reviewed the old witness statements, forensic reports, and case materials. However, no new strong evidence appeared at first. Investigators began by identifying and locating Elvin Kuliyev. Operational work revealed that Elvin was unemployed and lived a parasitic lifestyle. Investigators also discovered that he had previously been convicted and sentenced by a military tribunal in 1994 to 3 years in prison, which he had already served. At first, Elvin denied everything. He tried to avoid questions and invented excuses. But when confronted with the evidence and Sevda Huseinova's testimony, he finally confessed. Within 10 days, enough evidence had been collected to formally arrest him. However, investigators were convinced that Elvin had not committed the crime alone. Eventually, he revealed the names of his accomplices: his schoolmate, Rashad Ismailov, and a young man from Dagestan named Ruslan Abdullayev. The most horrifying part was their ages. At the time of the murder, Elvin was only 16 years old, and Rashad was just 13. Together with Ruslan, who had recently arrived from Dagestan, they had committed the brutal killing. So what happened that night? We must return to January 11th, 1992. That evening, near Pushkin School in Tovuz, the 3 young men were hanging out together. They had been skipping school, wandering around the city, drinking alcohol and smoking. Ruslan told them that his mother wanted to take him back home to Dagestan, but he didn't have money for the trip. He then suggested committing a crime to get money. For the teenagers, eager to prove they were grown up, the idea sounded exciting. They made a plan. They would lure a random driver to a remote location, kill him, and steal his car and money. At first, the 13-year-old Rashad was frightened by the idea of murder, but Ruslan mocked them, calling them cowards and insulting them until they agreed. The next evening, at around 8 p.m., the 3 met at a small cafe near the railway station. To build courage, they even drank a small shot of vodka. Soon they saw headlights through the window. It was Kamal Hüseynov's car. They approached the driver and asked him to take them to a nearby village. After agreeing on a price, they got into the car. Elvin sat in the front passenger seat. Ruslan and Rashad sat in the back. After driving for about 15 to 20 minutes, they reached the 8th kilometer of the road. Elvin told the driver to stop, saying he needed a moment to step outside. That was the signal. As soon as he stepped out, Ruslan and Rashad pulled out the metal rods they had hidden and began striking the driver's head with brutal force. They dragged him out of the car. At that moment, Elvin returned and joined them. All 3 attacked the helpless driver with extreme cruelty, striking his head and body repeatedly. Eventually, Kamal Hüseynov died on the ground. The killers searched his pockets and found only 75 rubles. They also took his gold ring, worth 17,300 rubles. Elvin tried to drive the car but panicked and accidentally drove it into a ditch. Unable to remove the car, they stole whatever they could, including the car stereo, cassette tapes, and the rear window. Finally, they left the victim's body half-stretched across the hood of the car and fled. The case finally reached its conclusion on February 18, 1999, when the Supreme Court issued its verdict. Since Rashad Ismailov was only 13 years old at the time of the crime, below the age of criminal responsibility, his case was closed. However, Elvin Kuliev was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The strange thing was that when investigators finally reopened the case 7 years later, they discovered that 2 of the perpetrators were already in prison for other crimes, and the third had just been released. This once again proved a harsh truth. Those who escape punishment for one crime often commit another. When someone avoids justice, it leaves a dangerous sense of confidence, the belief that they can commit crimes again and escape punishment once more.